This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
This episode is brought to you by Disney's Mufasa, The Lion King. Get tickets now for the ultimate family holiday movie experience. Reunite with the characters you know and the untold story you'd never expect. Witness Mufasa's rise from orphan to king and see how the legendary villain Scar got his name. Disney's Mufasa, The Lion King. In theaters everywhere this Friday. The kingdom awaits.
1, 2, 3, 4.
We are here to present a very special Christmas gift for you by discussing a Christmas gift for you. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
And this week we will be discussing the 1963 album, A Christmas Gift from You from Phil Spector. It was originally called A Christmas Gift for You from Phillies Records because that was his label at the time. But now it's known as From Phil Spector because he is the producer. And this is a collection of his artists that he was working with at Gold Star Studios at this time. And it's their take on the holiday season and that music. So a early rock and roll Christmas album. Not the earliest that we've done, but still a landmark release. And the reason that I decided to do this album this year in particular was because of the recent release of part one of Cher's memoir. There will be a second part next year. And I had a feeling this album would be mentioned in it because Cher's first recordings were with Phil Spector. She was part of his wall of sound of backup singers. Her first time ever in a recording studio was to do Be My Baby by the Ronettes, a legendary song, obviously. I don't need to really go into that, but this was in the midst of that year span about where she was always at Gold Star working with Sonny Bono because he was a gopher for Phil Spector and he was learning a lot. So I was kind of surprised by just how much she highlighted this album. I thought maybe it would be, oh, yeah, we did this album. But no, there was a lot more to it. She really remembered the sessions for it quite vividly and its release, so it makes sense why once I read the book, I was like, no wonder you remember the day this was released. And
yeah, what a day to release an album.
Yeah, yeah, I did not pick up on that immediately, but I was like, whoa, okay. But she had a lot of insight, and even more so than she did on many of her own albums from that time period, which I think says a lot about this album and how well known it is at this point in time, even though it wasn't really initially a success.
Yeah, I mean it's tough that you're releasing the day that President JFK was assassinated. So that's, I mean, it's a tough. I can only imagine that it was a tough holiday season period, but to release that day, you're overshadowed by one of the craziest experiences we've had in the history of America, at least the current history. So it's a tall order at the very least to come up shining on that day.
Yes, it is. But of course, it wasn't planned to be the case. Really, the sessions started before that. It was mostly done through long days over just a couple of months, which is pretty mind-blowing considering how lush the album was. And Cher almost wasn't on the album actually, though. So she was doing work with Phil Spector, but her mom, Georgia Holt, who is quite an important character in the book if you want to read it, which I of course recommend that you do, she saw that Cher really wasn't getting paid for work, that she was working for free. And Sonny was more than okay with that because he said, you're getting such a great education here. And when in the middle of the sessions for this album, everybody was all ready to work on A Christmas Gift for You, and Cher wasn't present, and Sonny said Cher's mom doesn't believe she's working because she's not getting paid, and she's not going to let her come back because she thinks she's partying. So Cher ended up getting a check for $25 from Phil Spector, and that was all that she got out of monetarily out of these recordings because most of the backing singers didn't really receive proper credit. Sonny Bono got some credit for it for percussion, and they just kept going though. So she worked for a big $25, but kept going. And Cher did write about just how long the sessions were. Like they were working 15-hour days, and it just was absolute madness. And you had the weight on Spector a lot too.
Was Cher's mom managing her at this point?
No, not at all. But Cher's mother was never her manager. Sonny was pretty much controlling everything at this point in time, but she just was appalled that like she had no money and was working all the time at Gold Star Studios with Phil Spector.
I mean, if you want to learn at this point in time, this is a great place to learn. I don't know if I'm necessarily against Sonny saying that. I mean, nobody wants to work for free, but you get to sit in on these sessions with the amount of personnel on these albums and Phil Spector on top of that. It's a pretty wild masterclass, if you ask me.
Oh, it definitely is. And Cher said in her book, quote, "The problem was that although Philip knew what he wanted, we had to wait for him to work it out in his mind and let us know what that was. We all wanted to do a good job, but sometimes our mistakes became the hook that Philip liked better than his original concept. Sonny sometimes stayed with him all night as he worked to get things right. Philip didn't like to be alone, so I'd stay home watching TV." So they just were working to the death, but Cher did have to admit, once we heard it, they'd all just marveled at what they created, and they just knew something very, very special had come to fruition. But unfortunately, the album was scheduled for release on November 22nd, 1963, the same day as the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which Cher wrote about how it affected her because she said that was really the first president that young people like her really connected with because he was young himself and so was his wife. And that after Kennedy was assassinated, nobody really wanted to be singing "Here Comes Santa Claus," which, yeah, makes sense. But Philip was pretty hurt by it personally, that like the album bricked because of it.
Yeah, but now, I mean, now it's heralded on a lot of lists as number one. It's up there. It's a wall of sound. Period. There's a lot. You go. We'll talk about this a lot, but in my opinion, you go to a lot of Christmas albums, regardless, and you're getting a one or two person show, even if it's a band. You're getting pretty straightforward stuff. This is full sound, orchestrated throughout so many beautiful people and so much beautiful talent. It is it's close to one of a kind. There's not many out there like this. I mean, you get into like Soul Christmas and stuff like that, or these different compilation albums, you get close, but not like this. This is just a wall of sound, the Phil Spector style.
That it is. Yeah, he got his best and brightest to work on this album, and they created an all-timer. And a couple of these songs are in the top 40 now as we speak, and they'll continue to rise because they're at this point holiday standards. And it's hard not to see why. I mean, I should rephrase. It's not hard to see why. And it's really interesting to think that at the time, these were pretty bold takes on these songs. We're all used to it now, but really, these songs weren't done like this before 1963.
Yeah, they definitely weren't in the mainstream radio play period. It's wild. That was part of my deep dive, is to really go back and see how many of these songs have been swung out like this, or really done in a soulful way? And none really. Like and going up against the mindset that I can only picture, but from what we know of America and American listeners at this point in history, to go up against that traditionalism, especially on songs like White Christmas, actually really a lot of these songs, but like White Christmas, Santa Claus Coming to Town, all these different traditional songs. It's another tall order. And that's a cool thing about this album. Again, we'll talk about it more, but for me, to see the amount of what's the word I'm looking for here? If you are dead set on something, you are
determined.
Yeah, that's a good one. To see the amount of determination and the amount of this is gonna go, this is gonna be exactly what necessarily Phil or all the artists wanted it to be. That they went forward with it with no thought that it wasn't. It seems like, and it's great. It really hits because of that. There was a lot of people proud about this, and there was a lot of people behind it. And that's why to this day it's heralded up there. It's a really, really unique thing to see.
Yeah, and it wasn't an easy process. Cher did recount one story about Leon Russell flat out yelling, "Fuck you, Phil," during the recording sessions for this because he was so demanding. And another story was that Brian Wilson, legend himself, was rejected for poor piano playing by Phil Spector. But this is his favorite album of all time. I'm sure it kills him a bit that he wasn't a part of it, but he still loved the result, and nobody's really arguing with it at this point.
I mean, that sets the tone for, I'm trying not to use the word crazy, but crazy Phil Spector here, very demanding, this much personnel on this album, and his demanding style of what we know from him, especially in this era. It seems like a recipe for disaster, and I can only imagine these recording sessions being tumultuous because of the amount of, not only the amount of players, but like the level of players here. Brian Wilson can't get on because he doesn't play up to par, because these guys are killers as session musicians all the way through. We could go through the list. I'm not going to right now, but
yeah,
these are top-notch session players who know how to get this done. So when you have a producer that is so hardcore on his style, it's bound to rub the wrong way against some of these artists, especially over so many takes over and over and over with this amount of people. It's got to be tough.
Yeah, Cher shouted out these musicians in her book. They were known as the Wrecking Crew, so if you're interested in them, look them up. But she acknowledged like they were the best in the game at this point in time. There was no topping them. And she even said she grew to like Philip. She met him before she started working with him, didn't have a great experience, and later she didn't have a great experience with him when she reconnected with him in the 70s. But at this point in time, she did like him. And it's pretty mind-blowing that Phil Spector produces. He was 24 years old. Sonny Bono was older than him and learning from him. He really... Yeah, it's mind-blowing that you were this innovative at that point in time. It's just crazy to think about. Like, you pioneered something and changed the world at such a young age.
Yeah, and I'd be hard-pressed going out on a limb here, but I think we'd be hard-pressed to find somebody other than some of the girls singing on this that are younger than Phil. I mean, we know Spector as this legend, per se, in the production field, but I mean, he was young at this point, and pushing these artists like that, especially on a Christmas album, you can see where it would come into somebody screaming expletives at him during Christmas recordings.
Yeah, he was a young man, but he knew what he wanted. And most of these singers, I mean, the lead singers were younger than him even, so
I,
it did make sense why he would push them. Of course, they were going to kind of do as they said, but it's not just the Spector show. We don't have this album without the brilliant vocalists on here, two in
yeah,
particular. You just don't have it without them. And we'll dive into who they are and why they're so great right about now as we do our thing and do the track by track.
let's get at it.
All right. So the album begins with White Christmas, sung by Darlene Love. A soulful version. It's the original lyrically. The original from Irving Berlin does have the spoken word passage about the palm trees in LA. It's often removed from the song, but it wasn't here. And this is a pretty mind-blowing vocal performance. She's got such soul in her voice, still does to this day. But she was 22 when she recorded this version, and she sounds wise beyond her years. I mean, it's just pretty mind-blowing to think a 22-year-old sang White Christmas like this. Well, she did, and Darlene held her own on and off the mic in the studio. That was why she was such a trusted collaborator. And I mean, it's a really well done version. It's updated for 1963 with a great vocal performance. Not much else to add. It's great.
Yeah, it is a great White Christmas. We get to this point every year where there is, even with me, this traditionalist sense, and when you're looking at different recordings, especially of White Christmas, sometimes they fall flat. This one does not. She kills it. I'm so glad you touched on the spoken word because it's something you don't get all the time here with White Christmas. But she is 100% heart and soul onto this, and it comes across. I mean, I'm going to say this almost on every track, but the way this composition is written for all of these session players is so demanding, and you can really listen after listen after listen, find another instrument, really concentrate and see here. This is a full orchestration of these players here at the start of this album, and it hits 100%. Nitpicking and very, very much so nitpicking. It's strong and awesome in its right, but as an opener, I feel like it is a little bit more suited for the middle of this album. So it does open with a bang, and it lets us know exactly where we are, but I think it takes one of the most powerful plays out of this album really early on. Really early on. Like I'm saying, I'm nitpicking right now because this is such a tight album, and I'm just trying to find little things here and there. But that would be the only thing I could say about this that isn't 100% positive. It's such a great recording of White Christmas. We hear it now more often than not, but it's one that everybody should really enjoy at least once.
Most definitely. Yeah, it has become a bit of a standard version of White Christmas, but maybe not as much of a standard version of a song as the next one, which is Frosty the Snowman, which was written by Jack Rollins and Steve Nelson. This one is recorded by the Ronettes, the most famous of the Spector era girl groups, with a true one-of-a-kind vocalist at the time known as Ronnie Bennett, later Ronnie Spector, because she was married to Phil Spector eventually, a few years after she recorded this one. And this is a short version of Frosty. It trims some of the fat from the whole story, I guess you could say. It's not the only one where that happens, but the meat of the song lyrically is there, and it allows for this new arrangement to breathe. And I'm going to say it. I don't think this is a hot tea take. Frosty the Snowman's love it or hate it. It's a pretty corny song. It just kind of is, but when Ronnie sings it, it sounds cool. effortlessly cool because that's what Ronnie Spector could do. She's the original bad girl of rock and roll. She doesn't play around. So I can't really think of a version I like more of Frosty the Snowman. You know, just like Ronnie sang.
When unprecedented times are all the time, it's time to start walking the talk with PwC. Leaders like you turn to PwC to see and stay ahead. Upskill your workforce, use intelligent automation, and transform big ideas into breakthrough outcomes. Explore the human-led, tech-powered solutions that help you thrive. It's all part of PwC. Learn more at pwc.com.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/MBO. Terms and conditions apply.
She kills it. They kill it. It's a great Frosty. It's very, very right there and done. As far as the compositions inside of this album, as far as they are set, this one is one of the more straightforward ones, minus her vocals, which she really does a great job making her own. It's not that it's not my favorite. I'm a sucker for the old Burl Ives, you know. That's where I always stick. But it's great, and this is the conversation that we were having earlier. Is this traditionalism spun on its head, and it could have went totally the wrong way, and it doesn't here. It's a great number 2 because it's just that classic, and it's here. Before we do a little bit of deep diving, if you must, as far as Christmas hits go. And it's well done. It's straightforward. It's there. This one is a run for Burl Ives for me, but something about that one always sticks with me. But this is a great number 2 for this album.
Hey, he worked it out on that, but I love it. But yeah, this next song is a bit of a deep dive. We've done several Christmas albums. Songs do repeat, but this is one we have not covered yet. And I'm not sure when we will again. It's The Bells of St. Mary's. This song dates back to 1917. It was written by A. Emmett Adams and Douglas Ferber. This is recorded by Bob B. Sox and the Blue Jeans. Bob B. It's Bob B. period, as in an initial. He is Bobby Sheen. And the 2 backing the Blue Jeans are Darlene Love, we heard her earlier, and Fanita James, who were both in the Spector girl group The Blossoms, one who didn't get as big as they should have, in part due to unfair credits. There's quite a lot of that in this era of music, unfortunately. But this is basically a duet between Bobby Sheen and Darlene Love. And it's a good version of the song. I don't think the song itself, there's a reason it's not a standard on the level of a White Christmas or Frosty the Snowman, but it's a good performance. It's very soulful, and it fits the album well.
It does fit the album well. I'm with you there. For me, this is the one that almost got away from him. If it wasn't for the way that the background singers really bring this one together, it's almost tough to figure out that it's the Bells of St. Mary. And that approachability, I'm okay with messing around with the traditionalism of it, but as far as stretching it a little bit too far where the listener doesn't realize what it is without a hard listen, I think is where this one falls a little flat for me. Of all of these, this one is just stretched a bit much. There's a lot of cool things that go on in this song. Like I said, the background singers really bring it for me here. But yeah, it's just stretched a little too much. It doesn't take you out of the album. It's not like, oh my gosh, this is such an avant-garde take. It doesn't sound like Christmas, but as far as the Bells of St. Mary, this one is a tad bit too far from its source material for me. But it does fit this album. The sound doesn't go away here. We're still in that mindset. It's just a little bit far from the source for me.
Okay. Yeah, they were flipping things on at their head all the time here. And next up, we're going to do some more of that with our fourth and final group we'll be discussing in the context of this album, the Crystals, doing Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Now, the Crystals have a very messy lineup history. In fact, the Blossoms are the voices you hear on their number one hit, He's a Rebel. None of the actual Crystals were on it. But by this point, the actual Crystals were there. But unfortunately to Spector, a lot of these ladies were pretty interchangeable, and they were kind of pawns, and it's really crappy that that was done, because they're human beings, they're vocalists. But at this point, the lead singer of the Crystals is Dolores La Brooks, who was 16 when she recorded this song. And I noticed a trend here how the Crystals tracks are the more youthful songs on the album, I guess you could say. And I think that works to have a young singer do something like Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I mean, she has a good voice, don't get me wrong. It's not quite as distinct as the other two ladies that we've heard here on the album so far, but those are both very hard shoes to fill, Ronnie and Darlene. It's a good version of the song. It's not the best, but it fits the album fine, and I do think we'll be hearing better from the Crystals coming up on this album.
Yeah, it is a cool one. It is a cool one. Over and over, I've gone through this one, and it's a great rendition. They do a great job here. I have to say, this lays the groundwork for Springsteen later on, for Santa Claus Coming to Town. Not just because of Steve Douglas here on baritone sax or Migliori on alto, period. It just has that sound, and I can see where I would think that the inspiration for Bruce and the boys later on came from this recording, as big as it was. So this is a cool one. It rocks. It's a little bit longer than you would think it is, and I like that. It has some real jam elements, if you will, here, but more so just real played out elements inside that lend themselves really well to this rendition. Right back on track. If I'm not saying we did lose anything in Bells of St. Mary, this one is exactly where this album wants us to be.
Absolutely. And we're in this realm. We're going to stay in it with the next track, which is Sleigh Ride, the Ronettes version. This is the most crazy example of something being twisted and becoming a standard, because now this is the go-to version of Sleigh Ride that you hear. This is the one that's highest charting every year. But in 1963, those background vocals, the horse clomps and sounds, those were brand new, hadn't been done before. And now it's the standard version of the song. Most covers of this song are based on the Ronettes arrangement. And I just saw Mariah Carey's Christmas show in Baltimore. She did the Ronettes version of Sleigh Ride, and she killed it. But nothing quite like the original. There's a reason that people keep going back to this. It's a classic. And Ronnie Spector this is just another great showcase for her vocals, because she brings a little sex appeal to Sleigh Ride. Like, much like you hear on a track like Be My Baby. It's like, let's take a sleigh ride together. Might be a little bit more to it, possibly, because she's got that nature that she's giving us with her vocals here. And it manages to be very cool, very rock and roll, but also very festive. And this is one I don't get mad about hearing ever. I said before on here it was the best version of the song, and I'm standing by that.
Yeah, we get the sleigh ride every single year. And, I am a sleigh ride junkie. as far as all different arrangements, even the the original orchestration that you hear, like the Boston Pops doing, or things like that. I love them all. I've played a bunch of different versions myself, and it is my ultimate Christmas song, so to speak. This version is genius, for what it did with this song is genius. It is such a really cool play on the way this was originally structured, because it takes that swing, tiny little swing element that we get towards the latter third of the original composition, and just runs with it. I mean, runs with it is an understatement. It really takes it to this level that had never been done before. This is a great sleigh ride. This is a great sleigh ride, and it's the reason why we hear it so much, because not only does it give a great take on it, but it's so approachable. It's such an approachable version of an all-time classic. This is up there, man. The Ronettes kill it all the time on Sleigh Ride. I love this one.
It's hard not to, really hard not to. But not every song is quite as standard as that, but that's the fun of going through the album, I think, because the next track is another one we haven't ever discussed before. Marshmallow World. This was written by Carl Sigman and Peter DeRose. It was first a hit for Bing Crosby, which tells you what you need to know. And again, we're going to turn it on its head to this wall of sound version with Darlene Love taking the reins on it. Now, I can't say winter's been much of a Marshmallow World so far this year. I'm not sure if it will be. But I still really enjoy the song and this version of it. And it's nice to hear Darlene Love get to do a more fun, upbeat tune after we heard her do somewhat heavier songs earlier on, and later on, for that matter. It's nice to get her to let loose a little bit, and she handles it with grace, and it's another really strong song on this album.
It is. It's strong. For me, the saxophones steal the show on this one. It's a tiny bit up tempo, just a little bit too much on tempo here. I think we lose a tad bit of the impact of this song at this. If it was just slowed down a little bit, I think we get more here. I understand we're swinging these eighth notes in here and really letting a rock and roll styling sound through. Just a tad bit slower. I love this song. Don't get me wrong. This version is amazing. I love how it ends. There's a lot in the composition that screams Spector here. It's a good rendition. It really is.
Most definitely. And it's actually the end of side one of the album, as it was originally intended. Now we would go to side two, which begins with I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, another standard, once again from the Ronettes. And again, this is another highlight, mostly because of Ronnie's voice. I'm basically a Ronnie Spector stan now, if you can't tell, because it just has that storytelling quality. She conveyed different things in each of her tracks on this song. And she always had that distinct tone to it no matter what, but it could convey so much. Truly one of the all-time great singers. She deserves every bit of praise that she got, even though she's sadly passed away a couple of years ago, which is very unfortunate. I don't think it's the ultimate version of this song, unlike the other two Ronettes tune, because it doesn't have that wide-eyed innocence of the Jackson 5 version. But really, the Jackson 5, they were taking some of the arrangement techniques of this version and using it to make it their own. So I don't think you have that version without this one. And this is still a really good listen. So another winner for me, and sadly the last track credited to the Ronettes.
Yeah, this one is great. You know, we don't get the intro a lot with the radio plays of this, and it's neat to hear that intro on here. I'm 100% with you on her narrative quality here. She really conveys a really great narrative structure inside of this and taking it her own way. The percussion here is, at first hardcore listen to this, the percussion really messed with me, but I see where Phil was bringing it through here, and it fits well after I go back and really get down on it. Hot tea take, I don't think it's hot. I'm with you. There is not a Jackson, because when you really listen to this, there is not a Jackson 5 version the way we got it without this. They really, I'm 100% with you. They really took a lot of inspiration and really played with this version more than the original version to get where we got with that. Of course, a young Michael singing it is going to have a different feel. But we definitely don't get that one without this. And that's why this one stands out on this album to me, or another reason why this stands out on this album to me, but a really great rendition here. And it opens the second side perfectly. A little bit more perfectly than White Christmas, in my opinion. That might be my hot tea take here. It's a great second side opener here.
I completely agree. And we're gonna just keep it going with the next track, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, another standard that was fairly new actually in the 60s. Some of these songs were pretty current at that point in time, which is interesting to think about because now we just know them as standards. This one's done by the Crystals, and this is a great use of the Crystals because I think Lala Brooks really sells this song in part because of her youth. She's got a powerhouse voice for a 16-year-old, and it works great for a song like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And it does remove some of the extraneous lyrics, like we don't get all the names of the other reindeer here. But the beat of the story with Rudolph is still there, and it's got the wall of sound, and yeah, I think the arrangement more than makes up for the missing lyrics. I really enjoy this version, and it's crazy to think this version was recorded a year before the iconic claymation TV special, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That's just crazy to think about, but it's true.
It is true. And the omission of lyrics is okay with me here because this more so for me is such a statement piece on this second half, because if you take out the syncopated guitar at the start of this, the boom, boom, bum, 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 it almost rolls straight out of I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus, especially the way the percussion is structured here. So it not only does its job as a number two, or, the second song on this side, but it rocks Rudolph in a way that had never been done before. And again, it doesn't take too many liberties from the original source material, but really gives us a look on how Phil's doing this in his own way. This one isn't as intricate in its orchestration, but it doesn't take us away because it's handled so well vocally. It's a great rendition of Rudolph. It might not be the one everybody hears all the time, but it's a good one.
Most definitely. And I did just think of this, actually. This is a few years after the iconic in its own right song, Run, Rudolph, Run by Chuck Berry was released. So I'm thinking maybe Phil was inspired a bit by that song to give the original Rudolph a bit of a rock and roll spin and knocked it out of the park.
I could see that.
Yeah. Just some food for thought there. But the next song, so this is crazy. So this is the 6th Christmas album that we have covered during our time doing Turntables and Tea. And it's the first time that we've covered Winter Wonderland.
Right?
Yes, I was like, wait, we haven't done Winter Wonderland before. That is so crazy. But this song was written by Felix Barnard and Richard Bernhard Smith back in 1934. And honestly, this is the perfect song for the Spector Christmas album because this is a love song, first and foremost, even before it's a Christmas song. And the best Spector girl group hits that we know are love songs. Be My Baby, Then He Kissed Me, The Do Run Run, all about love. And so is this song. So it really lends itself perfectly to this. This is credited to Darlene Love, but really I feel like it's her voice at the front of the wall of sound most of all. This is really a group effort, as it should be. It sounds great, and I don't think any song here lent itself more naturally to Spector's wall of sound than Winter Wonderland.
Yeah, even in its most traditional sense, it still really lends itself to Spector's ideals here. This one is for me the most cut and dry, not taking anything away from it, but to the source material. This one is pretty darn close to the original, and I love that. I think that's important, especially in the middle of the second side. We get this really neat piano and bass breakdown for the intro, and then it rolls right into almost a traditional version of Winter Wonderland. But it's such a well done one. Now, I've been waiting to get here because this, for me, this one is so strong that as a midpoint in the second side, I wish it could be in two other places. Fantasy draft here. If this one could have sat where White Christmas could have opened the album. It is 100% his sound. It is 100% a mission statement almost, and done well. There's one other place where I think it really would have excelled, and we'll get there soon. But such a great version of Winter Wonderland. We don't, maybe this is a hot tea take, but we don't get enough of this Winter Wonderland radio play wise for me. I don't get this one enough. And I love this version. So well done.
Yeah, I think you're correct. It didn't need to stray too much from the source material because it worked fine in this form. But yeah, I think a lot of the newer versions are more slickly produced and don't have the organic feel of this one. I do agree that I wish I heard this version more. But the next song does flip a standard on its head, and it's funny enough, we haven't discussed Winter Wonderland, but we did discuss this song last year on the Harry Connick Jr. album, Parade of the Wooden Soldiers. So this was instrumental by Leon Jessel, lyrics by Ballard McDonald added later. I mean, really, it's about toys, and it's a very fun and joyous tune, and the crystals are once again used for this, and I think it's the best use of the crystals on this album, easily, even though I enjoyed their other two songs. You just feel the joy of this song, and I feel like I'm seeing a parade of the wooden soldiers when I hear this song. Like, I can picture a music video in my head for it. So yeah, definitely another highlight for me. I know you're partial to Harry Connick's Parade of the Wooden Soldiers, but I'm partial to this one.
I was trying not to do any facial expressions while you were going through this one. Let me take a deep breath before I do my hottest tea take of this album. This is a cool version. No way it comes anywhere close to Harry Connick, but more so here, this is the only one that I think misses the mark, and like only because the syncopation of this song, the rigidness of the wooden tin soldier is lost a little bit here, even with the incorporation of the wood blocks. For me, it's lost, and mostly, and I'm not taking anything away from the crystals here because they do a great job vocally as far as just the beautifulness of their voices, but more than once I feel like they're just a tad ahead of this song, and it really takes away from the rigidness of this march of the wooden soldiers that I look for here. Again, Charlie hit it right on the head. I am a lover of the Harry Connick version. I love this song regardless, and I just think the wall of sound didn't do this one justice. It's a little bit too much for this very syncopated, rigid military march here. And it fades out. It fades out and it kills me. I'm not a big fan of the fade out, especially when there is a rigid ending to this song. So not my fave, and probably my hottest tea take on this album. But
it is in my book. This is a banger, if you ask me.
I heard that.
A bit more of a gallop than a march, but that's okay. For me, it is. It's okay.
It's too soft, not rigid enough.
Gotta let it loose a bit, and well, the next song can't really be compared to a prior version because it's the one at the time new song on here. Christmas Baby Please Come Home. We've discussed this song a couple of times already. I've stated my fondness for it. I just love that it's a very upbeat, joyous sounding song with melancholy lyrics, and in this case, the performance to match it. It just kind of sums up what the holidays can feel like a lot of the time. So I'm a huge fan of this song in just about any form, but there's nothing quite like the original. I know I've said before that I kind of prefer the Mariah Carey version, but some of that is due to nostalgia, because that's the version I've just heard more on the radio, and that's a Christmas CD that my parents had growing up. We didn't have this, but we did have Merry Christmas, which check out our episode on Merry Christmas if you haven't, because that's also a classic Christmas album. But there's nothing quite like the original. And again, Darlene, 22 years young, knocking it out of the park and making a holiday classic. And I actually, in relation to the Cher book, I went to a stop on Cher's brief book tour a few weeks ago out in Englewood, New Jersey, and at this appearance, Darlene Love was in the audience for part of the program and then joined Cher and the interviewer on stage. And they shared some stories, which was pretty cool. And they did talk about the song, and Darlene said you can really hear Cher on this song, and it's like you gotta really listen because that wall of sound is intense. It's hard to pick out voices from it. It's pretty hard to do.
This is one of those ones that's such a mind blower, because we know this song as a Christmas classic, but imagine hearing this for the first time. This song is so, in my opinion, is so undeniable. Just the way it's written, the way it's performed, oh my gosh, there's so much beautifulness in this song, crescendo wise, full bodied, belting it out. This is such a wild song to imagine listening to for the first time. Nestled in the second half of this album is a pretty wild place for this song for me, because it's so powerful, but also I understand that this was a new one. So it did its role here. It did its job here, as we always say. But such a epic composition here. It really is. This is one where it does a sort of fade out on the end, and I don't mind it, because I don't feel like I'm losing anything here. And just such an awesome song, and mind blowing to think that they made a classic here. You know, we've seen a few originals not really be classics. Some wild out there Christmas songs that everyone seems to try. You know, everybody wants to have a Christmas song, but this is just a classic and a top-notch Phil Spector wall of sound here. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know, as you go through time, less and less brand new Christmas songs really have the opportunity to become standards, and not too many have really since one. Some are on their way, you could argue, but not quite 100%. But I'm really glad that this is a standard. I do love this song, and there's nothing quite like it. And really, this is where we were first introduced to it, but it is bigger than the album. It has a life all its own. Really does.
It does indeed.
But now we're getting close to the end here. We're now at the penultimate track, which is Here Comes Santa Claus. This is Bobby Sox and the Blue Jeans. It makes sense to have a somewhat more joyful song lyrically, at least after Baby Please Come Home. This one for me is my least favorite. I do think they kind of missed the mark here because the original song is hokey, and it's supposed to be. That's why it works when you hear it in the montage in Christmas Vacation. It makes sense to have Gene Autry singing "Here Comes Santa Claus" right down Santa Claus Lane. Here, they just kind of take the fun, almost vaudeville-esque nature of it away with this more straight reading, and it's two strong vocalists, but I just think they don't really have the fun in it. If anybody were going to do this song, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think if you were going to give this song to any of these artists, it should have been the Ronettes, not Bobby Sox, because Ronnie could have sold the more again, silly nature of this song, because it's a fun, silly little tune. That's why people listen to it. I don't think this was the right decision to make, especially in regards to who was singing it.
Yeah, there's a couple decisions here that I'm not really big on. One, the placement, penultimate. This needs to be somewhere else. It's unfortunately it just doesn't hit the mark here. It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't have the fun vibe of this song, and it takes away trying, in my opinion, trying too hard to be its own version rather than celebrating. And like the places where you think, or in my opinion, the places where I think would be swung out and really done well, like the trumpet parts in here, are just way too syncopated and almost pushed. It just feels like this track feels like it suffers from way too many ideas and not enough editing, and it never really finds itself inside. I know that's crazy to say about the Wall of Sound as far as editing and whatnot, but this one just is not what I would go to as an example of Spector and the Wall of Sound, especially at the penultimate track, man. There's so many other songs that could have preceded what we're going to get on the final with some real strength, and this one is not the one.
Yeah, no technique is perfect. Even one as lauded as the Wall of Sound. Even that could have its missteps, and this is an example of it. But now we're at the end with really the only spiritual song at all on this album. They definitely stuck to the secular for the most part here, but we do end with Silent Night, which is credited to everybody. But it's not really the full Silent Night. It's Phil Spector really just doing a thank you note at the end of the album, and it's very he sounds so nice and sincere on it. Little would anybody have known the crimes that he would go on to commit. That's really the only way to put it. And after that, you got the kind of orchestral vocals. This is not a definitive version of Silent Night by any means, but I do think it's interesting from a historical perspective, considering the deliverer of the message.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight 2020 on that one, he does really have a very sincere vibe here, and I feel the sincereness of what he's saying. To call this is such a tough one for me. I understand we have a bit of a Silent Night here. We don't really get it. We do get this thank you note from Spector. As a final track, it does nothing for this album. And really, this, for me, is your penultimate track, because you still get everybody here and you say thank you. I guess maybe a worry would be that people wouldn't listen to the final track because it has a bit of boringness to it. But you put this before, and hot tea take, you stick something like Christmas, Baby Please Come Home here. I mean, at the final piece, really let it go. Or Winter Wonderland. This is the other place for me. You pop Winter Wonderland at the end of this album, I'm flipping it right back over. I get to the end and get a thank you from Phil. Even though I've had a lot of fun throughout this, I'm done. I'm finished for my first listen here. So I feel like it misses the mark here. It doesn't feel like an afterthought because of the sincerity of it, but it just there's so many different ways you could have structured this and still said thank you without ending on this really somber note to a very upbeat and new sound here that we got successfully through this album. So it's tough for me as a final piece here.
Yeah, I don't think one of the reasons that this album is considered an all-time great is because of the sequencing. It's just simply not as much thought was put into album track sequencing as we know it until a bit later in the 60s when the Beach Boys and the Beatles put more thought into creating albums as complete statements. Phil Spector just wasn't that guy, and that's one thing that Brian Wilson was able to take what he heard from this and create a more cohesive statement using the album as an art form. Really.
Yeah.
Just taking it and improving it a bit. So there we have it, A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector. I'm really glad we got to discuss this album. It's a standard and really interesting from a historical perspective, period.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, so what is your grade for this album as a Christmas music fanatic?
A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector is truly a Christmas gift. It's the gift that gives every year without sounding too commercial Christmas here, but it really historically, I'm glad you used that word there. It really historically is a gift. This is a compilation of so many classics, traditional classics, given this beautiful breath of life and taken in directions that nobody had imagined ever, and really done close to perfection. There are some times in here where it's not exactly what we wanted or what I want from a critical standpoint, but ultimately it is exactly what it sets out to be, and that is a new take on these classics. Sometimes you can really get a contrived take because artists almost are forcing themselves, sometimes it sounds like, to put these albums out, but this album doesn't sound forced in one bit. It sounds like a great Christmas party almost, of these great session players and unique vocal talents, and for that I give it an A.
Yep, I give it an A too. It's not really a perfect album, but it's perfectly imperfect in a way, just as a snapshot of its era, and they did what they set out to do. And it sounded simple on paper, but really it wasn't to do effectively, and they knocked it out of the park. So,
Yeah.
there you have it. Favorite track?
Everybody knows I'm a sleigh ride junkie. I said it earlier, but I've already given the flowers to the Ronettes on Sleigh Ride before. This one for me on this album, favorite track, is a tough one between Winter Wonderland and Christmas Baby Please Come Home. And I'm got to go with Christmas Baby Please Come Home for the sole fact of it's new at this point and it's mind blowing and it still has cemented itself into the Christmas tradition. So it's Christmas Baby Please Come Home for me.
Yeah, as much as I love that song, I feel like it's almost grandfathered in for me because the song has just gotten such a life of its own. So in terms of not the most obvious pick, I'm actually going to go with Ronette's Frosty the Snowman. I just could not stop coming back to it over the course of listening to and researching this album. It just really spoke to me. And I hope we do a bit more Ronettes in the future.
Know that.
Oh, that's what I'm hoping, because I love that voice. And now we have another Christmas album to do, because it is that time of the year, and it is all on you to decide, Cory. What are we doing?
Oh man, I've already decided. We're gonna go on a little we talked about flipping it on its head this week, but we're really gonna go out there next week on not necessarily a classic, but an album that spins all type of different, an album that spins all types of different predispositions on the genre on its head. And that is going to be A Christmas on Death Row, which is a compilation album from 96 with various death row artists that we still know and love to this day, but a wild take on a Christmas album. Immediately, and not to get too far into this album, but immediately we hear Christmas on Death Row and think, oh my gosh, what's Cory got us listening to this time? But it is a beautiful, beautiful take from some artists that you expect the gangster from, and it shows that Christmas can even soften up the hardest gangster. That's all. I don't want to get too far ahead, but A Christmas on Death Row, a very unique one, and it'll be cool to talk this one through.
It will be, definitely. We'll get to talk about some people we haven't discussed yet in the realm of hip-hop, because we've mostly been on the East Coast side of things when we've done hip-hop albums, so it'll be cool to take a jaunt down to the West Coast, and I'm looking forward to it. This is one I'm not familiar with at all, but it'll definitely have some songs that we haven't discussed on the now 6 previous Christmas albums we've done, so it'll be really good to do, something unique. We're looking forward to it, and just follow us to stay tuned for that and all other future episodes, because we got a lot of real good stuff coming up for you. So until then, we'll give you open up those Christmas gifts on Death Row and take care of yourselves.
Peace.